Hi, I'm Jess and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Today is Thursday, the 25th of June, 2026 as I record this, and I'm coming to you from a near perfect summer day in New Hampshire. This is episode 2, and today I'm going to talk about all of the mistakes I have made as a new knitter so far. But first, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for all of the love you have given the first episode of this channel. You liked, you commented, and you subscribed. If I am just sitting here and talking to the camera, it feels like I'm shouting into the void, but you have made this feel more like a conversation, and that is what I have wanted all along. So thank you. So as far as today's topic, I am going to talk about my mistakes. And I'm mostly going to talk about mindset mistakes, not so much about practical mistakes. I will continue to make practical mistakes. That is the nature of this hobby. But I'm going to talk more about mindset mistakes and where they tripped me up along my knitting journey. So grab your current project and let's get vulnerable. Mistake number 1. Assuming experienced knitters knew better than me. And I want to put that word better in quotation marks. I am a recovering people pleaser. I am a recovering perfectionist. Whenever I'm approaching a new topic, I have a tendency to assume that people who are more experienced in that topic know better than me. And that's not always the case. And this doesn't just apply to knitting. This applies to a lot of areas of life. I wouldn't use the word better. Experienced people in knitting just have a different experience. They may have more knowledge. Maybe they've done some skills and techniques that I don't have yet. Maybe they're a different kind of knitter. I am a thrower. Maybe they're a flicker. So I'm trying to eradicate the idea that experienced knitters are better than me. And the biggest example I have is over and over and over again at the start of my knitting journey, I kept hearing use wooden needles. Wooden needles are easier for new knitters to use because they're a little bit stickier and they'll hold on to your stitches better. I would argue that a new knitter should use lots of needles. Find what needles work for you. I don't want something as simple as a tool preventing you from going further in this hobby. Way back when my mom first taught me how to knit when I was a teenager, I mentioned this in the last episode, I had those giant plastic needles. That's how I learned to knit. It made it so easy, and I caught on right away. So I wouldn't put everything into a one-size-fits-all category. I would encourage new knitters to explore needles. Maybe you need quads. Maybe you need a triangular shape. Use what works best for your hands and what helps you engage in the hobby with the most ease. Mistake number 2. Assuming all pattern designers think like me. This one is going to get messy. I have brought props to go through this mistake that I made. So let's start by name dropping. I want to talk about Andrea Mowry. If you are involved in knitting at any level these days, you've probably heard of Andrea Mowry. She has a pretty big community here in the internet. If you went to Rhinebeck last year, you saw ooey gooey sweaters everywhere. She is a prolific pattern designer. And I would say, is she the nicest person in the world? I would say she's in the top 5 competing for that top spot of nicest person in the world. I met her at Woolen Affair last year. She is genuine. She's authentic. She truly wants to help knitters be better at their craft. And she spent a lot of time talking to people. I am an introvert. I'm not shy. I wouldn't be doing YouTube if I was shy. But I have a very small social battery. It drains me. So watching her at Woolen Affair engage with so many knitters so earnestly, it was amazing to watch. Now, that being said, Andrea Mowry made me cry. I started the Traveler Cowl pattern of hers back in February. I got through the setup rows, took everything off my needles, did it again, took everything off my needles and did it again. I couldn't get it. It made zero sense to me. I could not figure out what she was talking about in this pattern, what was going on, what I was supposed to do, how this thing was supposed to look. When I first started knitting again more seriously about a year ago, a very well-meaning person told me that I needed to knit all of Andrea Mowry's patterns, that she had the best patterns and I needed to knit them, and she encouraged me to start downloading some of them. So imagine the depth of my frustration when I could not start the Traveler's Cowl. I didn't even get into the pattern. I didn't get past the setup rows. I could not get this thing started. I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. I watched a bunch of videos that Andrea had posted. She provides a lot of tutorials for her patterns. I could not figure it out. When I started crying, I gave up. And I put my knitting away for probably 2 weeks. I convinced myself, again, as a recovering people pleaser, as a recovering perfectionist, I had convinced myself that if I couldn't do this pattern, I wasn't smart enough to be a knitter. I wasn't good enough to be a knitter. I couldn't do this. It took me 2 weeks to realize I was being an idiot. I went back to my knitting. I went on Ravelry and I found a different pattern. I found this pattern. This is the Honey Cowl. I knit it in Lavender Loon. This is a DK weight yarn, and this was their exclusive colorway for Woolen Affair last fall. I will link everything down below, including the pattern, my project page, and the yarn used. I, even now, get the most compliments when I wear this. It is a stunning pattern. It's an easy pattern. This is just a slip stitch, and it's knit in the round. It's pretty big, so it took a really long time to knit, but it's a beautiful finished object. After this pattern, confidence restored, I downloaded a pattern that was similar to the Traveler Cowl. It's a triangular shaped bandana type cowl where you start with the small triangle cast on. Very similar to the Traveler Cowl. As I started knitting that and I was going through it, I realized how similar it was to the Traveler Cowl. I got about a third of the way through that pattern and a little light bulb went off in my head. I was doing the things, all of the techniques, all of the skills that were needed for the Traveler Cowl, I was doing in this pattern with zero frustration. My flabbers were gasted. What was going on? I went back to the Andrea Mowry pattern and I said, okay, what is happening? Why can I understand this pattern and I can't understand this pattern? I then went back through the Traveler Cowl pattern and I started to see what Andrea Mowry was trying to say, and which my brain could not compute. I don't know why. I do not have the Andrea Mowry translation chip installed in my brain. I cannot, for the life of me, interpret her patterns. Here's how I know. This week I cast on her Shift Cowl. This is her pattern. The Shift Cowl is probably from I think it's from 2018. This is a very popular pattern of hers. It's a little bit older. A lot of people have done pattern reviews for this, and they've done finished object reviews for this pattern. So I downloaded this pattern. I started reading through it. Made zero sense to me. This time, instead of crying in frustration, rethinking all of my life choices, I went to the internet and I looked looked for those finished object videos. I looked for the pattern tutorials. I looked for knitters who had done this pattern and who were sharing their key takeaways from it. There is more to a pattern than what's written on the page. I think as knitters, we experience things in the practical making of a piece that we can then share with other knitters. So I started looking at these videos and listening to what knitters were sharing. And I realized this is mosaic knitting, which is something I've never done before. But I also realized I had another pattern downloaded from a different designer that was also mosaic knitting. So I went back to Ravelry, went back to my library, found that pattern, and started reading it. And then I compared the two. The pattern for mosaic knitting from designer B, I understood. The shift cowl pattern, I did not understand. There were very key parts of this pattern that went right through me. I did not understand at all what I was doing. But by watching those finished object videos and the pattern review videos, going to a different mosaic knitting pattern, this is how far I am. And how beautiful is that? I'll hold it up so you can see. This is a gorgeous pattern. I understand why people make multiple shift cowls. It is a true experiment in color. Now, what the heck? Why can't I interpret Andrea Mowry patterns? I don't know why, but here is the thing. Pattern designers, and especially ones as good as Andrea Mowry and as prolific as she is, they are writing to a huge audience. They need to write patterns that lots of different people who think differently can interpret. She is not writing this pattern specifically for me. There is no reason why I should think that pattern designers should think like me. That's what YouTube is for. These finished object videos, these pattern design tutorials, all of these things are to help you interpret the pattern, because not all pattern designers are going to think the way that you do. Don't make the same mistake I did. Also, I wanted to show this to you because there's a mistake in it and you can see it. And one I didn't realize until I had started the second section. Again, this is mosaic knitting. So you're carrying the strand across the back of your working yarn. And what happened in this first section was, this was my first time knitting with more than one strand of yarn, and I was very scared of dropping one of the strands. So if you look at this, these are scared stitches and these are relaxed stitches. So these stitches are puckered. They should not be puckered. When you're mosaic knitting, you want to control the tension of your working yarn in the back so you don't pucker those stitches. This part of the cowl goes on the back of the neck here. No one's going to see it. I'm not frogging that. Recovering perfectionist. Look at me go. So I wanted to share the actual cowl itself so you could see I'm still making practical mistakes because I'm a new knitter and I'm learning. So these stitches are puckered. These are not, because I am learning how to mosaic knit the right way. Okay, that was number 2. Number 3. Did you hear what I just said? I'm learning to knit the right way. My mindset mistake number 3 is deciding there was a right and wrong way of doing things. We're going to go back to this. Again, as a recovering perfectionist, I would normally rip these stitches out. I would say, this is not the right way of doing this. I'm going to rip it out. But the realistic Jess that I am coming to be says, no one's going to see that. I'm going to leave it in there. That's my lesson learned of learning how to mosaic knit. In February, I wouldn't even have attempted this. So heck yeah, I'm going to leave those in there. Look at what I did. There is no right and wrong way of doing knitting beyond the basic mechanics of it. Yes, there's a way to make a stitch so that it stays interlocked into the fabric. Yes, there is math involved. There's a lot of math involved in knitting. But there's no right or wrong way of doing it. If you want to knit an entire wardrobe with acrylic yarn in the most neon colors you can find, rock out. You can absolutely do that. You will find people in the fiber arts community who are passionate about certain things. They're passionate about non-superwash woolly wools. They're passionate about using hand spun. That's awesome. Don't let it overtake your thinking and direct you into the mindset of right and wrong. These people are just passionate about what they're doing. Find out what you're passionate about. Do the fiber arts the way that you want to do that. That lets your creativity flow. Stay away from the right versus wrong mindset. Now my favorite mindset mistake, because it's a painful one and a painful lesson I had to learn. Mistaking unfamiliarity with incapability. Let me tell you a story. Last summer, my husband and I had 6,532,741 weddings to attend. I exaggerate, but that is what it felt like. It felt like so many weddings, wedding after wedding after wedding. Now, if you will recall, I started knitting seriously about a year ago. In the spring of last year, downloaded a pattern for a beach wrap that called for a nice linen or a cotton yarn. It was a summery, flowy wrap. Perfect to toss on over a dress you're wearing to a summer wedding. Summer weddings are tricky. The ceremony is usually late afternoon and the hottest part of the day. And then you have the reception after the sun goes down and things start to get cold. A summer wrap would have been perfect. I had the pattern for it. I had the needles for it. I had the yarn for it. I could have made this wrap. I printed off the pattern. It was like 5 or 6 pages long, and there was a chart to follow. I panicked. I looked at that chart and I said, whoa, I can't do a chart. I can't do this wrap. I didn't make the wrap. I made the wrap this month. It took me like 2 or 3 days. It was the easiest pattern I've ever engaged with. I could have knitted it a year ago. Easy. Easy. It's all knit and purls. It was a reverse stockinette stitch pattern. You slip the last stitch on the row. That's it. So easy. I could kick myself that because I wasn't familiar with using a chart, I decided I was incapable of doing the chart. I didn't even try it. I'm so annoyed with myself. So please don't make that mindset mistake. Don't confuse unfamiliarity with incapability. We're going to talk about one of my favorite mindset mistakes. And again, this is one that applies to a broader subject than knitting, but it comes up a lot in knitting because this is what my social feeds are full of. It's not a race. Knitting is not a race. It's called slow fashion for a reason. Social media exacerbates this problem because you are only seeing highlight reels of people's lives. You're not seeing the truth. I try to be more honest in my social feeds. The wrap I was just talking about that I made this month, I knit it twice. And we're going to go into more detail about why I knitted it twice in the next problem. I put that on my social media feeds. It should have been done. I ended up having to frog the entire thing, knit it again. I put that out there because I think social media is telling our brains that we're behind, that there is some imaginary deadline that we're not meeting, that we're not living up to our potential, and that we should just give up now because we will never catch up. It was one of the reasons why I started this YouTube channel. There are wonderful experienced knitters on here who are talking about incredibly complex techniques and patterns and garment making at a level that I'm not at yet. And that made me feel overwhelmed. Is there anything wrong with them sharing that information? Absolutely not. And as mentioned before, I'm really glad they're sharing that information. I would not be where I am in my knitting journey without other knitters sharing their experience. So please keep sharing your experience. I just don't want other new knitters who maybe have more difficulty realizing these things to think that that's the norm. That you should already know everything there is to know about knitting. That there is this deadline that we've manufactured and you're not going to make it, so you shouldn't even try. Go at your own pace. The deadline is in your head. Just keep going. One of the things, I've now made several triangular cowls where you make one right, make one left. And when I first started making these cowls, I had to look up every time, and I'm sure you know what I'm going to say. When you make one right, do you go in the front or the back? Same for make one left. I now know which one intuitively, where it goes, front or back, when I'm making one right, making one left. I don't have to look it up anymore. That's progress. That's my progress on my own timeline. It's not a race. It's not something that I decided I needed to know by a certain date. It was something that just happened organically. And that's how I'm going to continue my knitting journey. I am not going to let outside forces try to convince me that I'm behind. I don't need the added stress. So let's talk about that wrap that I knit twice. Because as I stated at the beginning of this episode, we were going to talk mostly about mindset mistakes, because those are the really challenging ones. Practical mistakes in a tactile hobby are going to happen. That is something to understand, accept, and learn how to overcome. So let's talk about a practical mistake that I made. And the reason I want to talk about it is it was a lesson learned, and it was one that hurt a lot. So let me tell you the story. I was making a beach wrap. Finally, that summer wrap that I should have had last year, I was finally making it with a beautiful cotton yarn from Juniper Moon. It had this beautiful fade to it in blues and teals, very summery feel to it. I was on the last repeat. If you watched my first episode, you know that I'm a dog mom. I'm the mom of 2 basset hounds. I was knitting outside with the dogs. They were in the yard. The dogs, I need to state again, are very old. Most of the time, they're just sleeping because they're so old. So we're outside. They were asleep. I was knitting. I heard a noise. The boy was getting in trouble. He had gotten up at some point. He was getting into things. He was about to eat something he shouldn't. I know if you're a dog mom too, you're a dog parent, you're a dog sibling, you know that feeling of here comes trouble, here comes the giant vet bill, you need to intervene. I dropped my knitting and I ran. When I got back to my knitting, most of the stitches had fallen off the needles. I don't know what happened because I thought I just set my knitting down, but when I got back to it, it was all kerfluffled. So I tried saving it, but as I mentioned, the yarn that I was working with was a fade. And wouldn't you know that the last repeat was in the middle of the darkest blue in the fade. It was nearly black yarn. Black yarn is notoriously difficult to work with because it's hard to see the stitches. I couldn't see the stitches. I got a contrasting yarn in a really bright color, even brighter than this. It was a very bright pink, to try to highlight the stitches and put in a lifeline so I could try to figure out where I was. I then frogged back, had all the stitches. They all counted up. They were all there, had all the stitches. But I had recovered too well from my little Andrea Mowry meltdown in February, and I got too cocky, too confident. I didn't put in any stitch markers to tell me where I was in the pattern. It was a reverse stockinette pattern. the fabric was just a bunch of bumps and you couldn't really tell where you were. And the dark yarn didn't help. So I thought, okay, maybe I can frog back to a lighter color. I tried frogging back to a lighter color, still didn't help. I didn't know where I was. And the wrap was shaped. So you had to get to the right row or you were going to disrupt the shape of the wrap. I couldn't do it. I didn't even have a stitch marker in to tell me what was the right side and what was the wrong side. That was a bad, bad mistake. I had to frog the whole thing. I was on the last repeat and I had to frog the entire thing. So, practical lesson learned. Stitch markers. This is not my idea. I've seen a lot of knitters use this. They make a stitch marker tin at the beginning of a project. These are tins. I just got these, I actually don't know, probably a hobby store. They come in packs. You can get them in packs, all different sizes, shapes. So now what I do, because the lesson is learned, at the beginning of a project, I sit down with my pattern. And this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. Read your entire pattern before you start. I am surprised at how many patterns are written so that all of your options in the pattern are actually at the end. So make sure you read through the entire thing and see what your options are in making the pattern. So when I read through the pattern now, I make note of any sections and any repeats. And then when I go to sit down and put my knitting bag together, I decide what color stitch markers I'm going to use to designate a section versus which stitch markers I'm going to use to designate a repeat. And I will show you here on my shift cowl. Here are my sections. You can see I'm using orange to designate the section so I know where I am. I use a very distinct stitch marker to note right side and wrong side. That's important if you're trying to figure out where you are in a pattern. So that's the lesson that I've learned. Again, I use these little tins you can pick up in hobby stores. And then these are just the locking stitch markers. You can find these everywhere. Lots of different colors. I have a whole set of them. Again, a lot of knitters I've seen used these and use this method of marking pattern repeats and sections. And now I know why. So you don't have to make a project over again. Let's talk about the last mindset mistake that I want to go over today. Stopping at a superficial understanding of any topic involved in a fiber art hobby. I have a tendency to think again in terms of right and wrong, black and white, yes and no. So if I'm asking a question, I'm looking for a yes or no answer. When I first started knitting again, one of the questions that came up was superwash versus non-superwash and what is the difference? Seemed like a yes or no thing for me. One was one way, one was the other way. Sure, simple enough. Let's figure it out. I have now been knitting for a while, really getting into this. As I mentioned in the last episode, I'm a very type A person. I'm very nerdy. I like to go deep into things. So I'm trying to fill in those gaps where I acquired superficial knowledge about a year ago. I'm trying to get more in-depth knowledge. And a lot of things are coming to light. Like what actually happens to fiber to make it superwash. Now that I have all the information about what a fiber goes through to become superwashed, I'm less inclined to use superwashed yarn. Am I never going to use it? I wouldn't say that. I don't like dealing in definitives. It's dangerous. So yes, I would still use a superwash yarn. And I would argue there are times when you want to use a superwashed yarn where they're preferable. I will do a whole episode on gift knitting in which superwash yarn is going to be talked about a lot. If you've knit gifts for people, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I wish before I had purchased some of the yarn that's in my stash, I had known more about the difference between superwash and non-superwash. So that discussion alone really sparked a note in me to say, hey, don't stop at the yes or no answer. Go deeper. And this recently resurfaced when I started learning more about farm yarn. And as I mentioned in the last episode, I'm passionate about animal welfare and sustainability and our environment. And so now, instead of looking at a small dyer who may be making beautiful yarn, I'm going to say, yes, that's beautiful yarn. Where did it come from? Was it ethically sourced? Were the animals well cared for? These are things that are important to me. And it's all personal. It's all subjective. So you may have other things that you are passionate about. Get into them. Dig deep. Figure out what matters to you. Figure out what all the aspects are of that topic before you make a decision. And as a side note to that, understand that you can change your mind. I think we live in a world that encourages people to be right away, to know what you're going to be doing at 18 for the rest of your life. We're programmed early, and it's just not true. We are human beings who are constantly gathering data and information, and when we make a decision with the information we have at that time. You may get new information, you may get new data, and you can change your mind. What I would encourage you to do is to have the mindset of gathering that information. Don't stop at the yes or no. Go deeper. Don't make the same mistake I did. Now, it's your turn. I'm going to hand this over to you. Your turn to get vulnerable down in the comments. Let me know, let other new knitters who will be reading those comments know what mistakes you've made in your knitting journey. Help other new knitters learn. Maybe we could avoid the mistakes you made. Maybe we'll make them even better. Who knows? Thank you for listening while I spun a good yarn. Please like, comment, and subscribe. When you do all of those things, it tells YouTube that the content that I'm making on here is good and they will serve it to others, and that helps my channel grow. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you for the next one.